Howdy, folks, and welcome to the 2032 podcast, the podcast where we break down and give the historical backgrounds for the most important issues, changes, and events affecting American families today. I'm your host, Ken LeBlanc. I decided to start the 2032 podcast because of the amount of deliberate misinformation and, more importantly, misunderstanding that is out there about what is happening in America today. In this and future podcasts, I'll cut through the smokescreens, the lies, deceptions, and gaslighting to get to the heart of what is taking place currently in our country. I'm not going to talk about what happened this morning or even yesterday, a lot of which is only a distraction from the important changes that are impacting us today. The research for these topics can't be had in a couple of hours or even a few days. Takes a long time. So let's get started. In this first podcast series, I'm examining patriotism in America and how it's changed over time, and hopefully help everyone understand what it means today and why it's important to understand the divisions and divisiveness that exist in our country, why it's there. This is part one of a 6-part series where we'll trace the evolution of American patriotism from the Revolutionary Era through to our present day. Over these 6 episodes, we'll see how patriotism has been continuously contested, redefined, and been used for different purposes throughout American history, and how it can be and perhaps is being abused today. So what is patriotism? Before we dive into the history, let's establish and define what we mean by patriotism. At its core, patriotism is devotion to and love for one's country, characterized by support for its interests, values, and way of life. It's important. It involves a sense of loyalty, pride, and commitment to one's nation and fellow citizens. But here's what's important to understand. Patriotism is not a one-dimensional concept. It's been debated by philosophers, political scientists, and everyday citizens for centuries. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines patriotism as, quote, love for one's country, identification with it, and special concern for its well-being and that of its compatriots. This philosophical perspective emphasizes both emotional attachment and a sense of responsibility. Notice that it includes both feeling and action, both emotion and duty. Political scientists often distinguish between different types of patriotism, and understanding these distinctions is crucial for making sense of what we see today. There's constitutional patriotism, which is loyalty to shared political values and institutions rather than ethnic or cultural identity. It emphasizes what unites us is our shared democratic principles and constitutional framework. Then there's civic patriotism, which focuses on commitment to democratic principles and civic participation. It's about showing up, voting, running for office, engaging in your community. It's active rather than passive. Think serving on a jury. And then there's cultural patriotism, which is pride in national culture, its history and traditions. This might include celebrating holidays, honoring historical figures, or preserving cultural practices. Think the 4th of July, Thanksgiving. George Orwell famously distinguished patriotism from nationalism, and this distinction matters enormously. In 1945, he wrote an essay in which he said patriotism is, quote, devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life in which one believes to be the best in the world, but has no wish to force upon other people, end quote. Nationalism, by contrast, he said, tends to be aggressive, exclusive, and inseparable from the desire for power. Political philosopher Maurizio Veroli, in his 1995 book, Love of Country, argues that patriotism should be based on shared political values and commitment to Republican liberty rather than the ethnic or cultural sameness. This becomes especially important as we trace how American patriotism has evolved through waves of immigration and demographic and geographic change. Okay, so that's the framework. And let's see how it played out in American history. The Revolutionary Era, the birth of American patriotism. American patriotism as we know it emerged in the 1770s as colonial resistance to British authority intensified. The concept of being an American patriot didn't exist before this period. How could it? These were British subjects protesting colonial rule who had to invent a new identity and what would later become a national identity. When colonists began calling themselves patriots, they were making a pretty bold claim. They were distinguishing themselves from the loyalists, who were colonists who remained faithful to the British Crown. The colonial population of the day was divided into roughly three major groups: patriots supporting independence, loyalists supporting the continued British rule, and the monarchy, and a substantial number who remained neutral, trying to avoid taking sides. At varying times, it looked like either side could be a losing cause. The term patriot in revolutionary America carries specific meaning beyond simple love of country. Early patriots emphasized key principles. First, fair dealing with other colonists. This wasn't just about fighting the British. It was about how Americans would treat each other. Second, mutual support and collective action. Third, and perhaps most importantly, commitment to Republican values that rejected the monarchy and aristocracy in favor of individual liberty. The First Continental Congress helped formalize this patriotic identity. It served as a unifying institution that inspired patriotic spirit across the 13 colonies. Before the Congress, colonial identity was primarily local. You were a Virginian, a Pennsylvanian first. The Congress began creating something new, a shared American identity. The Revolutionary Era patriotism centered on several interconnected ideas. Resistance to tyranny and defense of natural rights were paramount. The colonists weren't rebelling against all government, but against government that violated their fundamental rights. They wanted the sanctuary of their home and their own spiritual beliefs. There was commitment to self-governance and Republican ideals. There were concepts like citizens have a duty to actively engage in governance for the common good, having a balanced government with different power centers to prevent tyranny, a commitment to the rule of law. Government authority would now come from laws, not arbitrary rule, and there had to be a citizen's commitment to obey these laws. Popular sovereignty. Ultimate political power needs to rest with the people, not one individual or a select few. And opposition to tyranny. Strong checks against concentrated power. The emphasis was on civic virtue and sacrifice for the common good. The idea that citizens had obligations to each other and to the Republic. Most people don't know this, but print media of the time played a crucial role in spreading patriotic sentiment and uniting the disparate colonies. Pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, more like a book, small book, but they call it a pamphlet, circulated widely, creating a shared language of patriotism. Newspapers reprinted letters and resolutions from other colonies, helping colonists see themselves as part of a larger movement. Remember, the revolution started as a local protest, but grew into the Revolutionary War. Think about that. Here's something else that might surprise you, but should be self-evident. After independence, approximately 80% of the Loyalists remained in the new nation and became American citizens. Think about what that means. These were people who had actively opposed independence. yet they were able to become American citizens. This means that from the very beginning, patriotic identity could be adopted rather than inherited. American patriotism was something you could choose, not something you were born into. This is fundamentally different from European nationalism, based on ethnicity and bloodline. This inclusive quality of American patriotism, based on ideas and ideals rather than ancestry, would become one of its most defining characteristics. Though, as we'll see, it's also one of its most contested aspects. The early republic, constructing national identity. After winning independence, the new nation faced a different challenge, transforming revolutionary fervor into lasting national identity. Victory in war was one thing. Building a nation was another. The early republic saw the invention of traditions, the establishment of national symbols, and intense debates over what it meant to be an American. This wasn't a natural or inevitable process. National identity had to be constructed deliberately. The early 19th century witnessed rising nationalism fueled by several factors. Territorial expansion gave Americans a sense of continental destiny. Economic growth, particularly in manufacturing and commerce, created national rather than just regional economic interest. And there was a shared commitment to democratic ideals that distinguish America from the monarchies of Europe. However, and this is crucial, American nationalism developed differently than European models. We lacked the traditional building blocks of European nationalism. There was no strong military tradition to rally around. There was no national church to provide spiritual unity. There was no ethnic sameness as a unifying force. America was already diverse, with different religious denominations, different European origins, and of course the presence of enslaved Africans. And then there were the indigenous peoples. So what held the nation together? Patriotism in this era was closely tied to constitutional loyalty and civic participation. The Constitution itself became sort of a sacred document, a sort of civic religion. Westward expansion and manifest destiny provided a forward-looking narrative. Economic nationalism through the American system, promoted by figures like Henry Clay, tied different regions together through infrastructure and trade. And there was a growing sense of American exceptionalism, the idea that America represented something new in human history, a republic based on democratic principles rather than inherited privilege. No House of Lords here. But by the 1850s, cracks in this national identity became impossible to ignore. Competing visions of American patriotism emerged between the North and the South. Both sections claimed authentic patriotic credentials while defining the nation's founding principles differently. The North increasingly emphasized the Declaration of Independence assertion that all men are created equal. Northern patriotism began incorporating anti-slavery sentiment, arguing that slavery violated America's founding principles. We the people, all inclusive. The South, on the other hand, emphasized states' rights and constitutional protections for property, which included enslaved people. Yes, in this regard, they were considered to be property in the South, not people. They were treated like cattle, bought and sold at markets. We'll save that for a later podcast. Southern patriotism defended slavery as consistent with the founders' intent and essential to Southern society and economy. After all, Washington and Jefferson were slave owners. Now, both sides claim the revolutionary heritage. Both invoke the Constitution. Both consider themselves the true patriots. This fundamental disagreement over what America was and what it meant to be an American patriot set the stage, until today, for the nation's greatest crisis. Okay, so what happens next is, anyway, software's a little bit tricky. So anyway, in our next episode, we'll examine the Civil War, when American patriotism literally went to war with itself. Both the Union and Confederate forces claim to represent true American values. We'll explore how this conflict transformed American nationalism and created debates over national memory that persist to this day. We'll also look at the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, when massive immigration forced Americans to reconsider what patriotism meant in an age of unprecedented diversity. Well, if you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel at 32 Podcast. All the historical facts that I'm covering in this series comes from various sources, and it's covered in the bibliography for the series. If you'd like a copy, email me at 2032podcast@gmail.com, requesting the bibliography for patriotism. Also, send me some feedback. What'd you like? What'd you not like? Make suggestions on how I can improve things. Well, I'm kind of new at this, so I could use a lot of help. Well, thanks for listening. I'm Ken LeBlanc. Join me next time as we explore patriotism in crisis, when patriots fought patriots.
Yes, we'll rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Bright in its glory shines every star, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again.